Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Redarc Tow Pro Elite proportional brake controller on a 2022 Chevy Tahoe. If you're used to a traditional brake controller, you're probably thinking of hitting your knees on it as you get in, and that's because they mount down generally pretty low. But as new vehicles kind of come out, there's less and less space to mount them up. And that's where the Redarc really shines. The small footprint not only looks super clean, but it makes it to where you're not really having to cause any issues when you're hopping in and out of your vehicle. It's super easy to use, and just with the push of a button, you still have that manual override. You can still adjust your gain, and you have all the features that you'd need from a normal brake controller in a much smaller package. Now, another great thing is you're able to go from proportional mode, which it's going to brake as much as you brake, or you can even have the user control mode where you actually set the gain to wherever you want it. So depending on your driving situation or the conditions you're in, you can set it up to where it's going to work perfectly for you, and it's super easy to adjust. You're not really having to mess around with it down here. You just turn the knob, and when it's lit up, you can see exactly where it's at as far as number, and you have this nice indicator sticker to also kind of let you know exactly where it's at. So overall, super easy to use. There's not a whole lot of extra gadgets. There's no display screen, but really you don't need all that, and this is proof of that. Another great part about this is the installation is actually really simple to do. As far as this one goes, we tied into some factory wiring for our tow package, and that just goes into the harness, into our module, and really it's just kind of plug and play once you have those main wires butt connected up, and you just tidy it all up, drill a hole to mount this, and that's it. So let's take a look at the installation and we'll get yours installed. To begin our installation, we're going to need to find the factory wiring so we can tie in to the brake controller. Now, a lot of vehicles will have a factory plug and you'll be able to just plug that in. This one's going to be a little bit different, but it's not going to be that hard to still get installed. There's going to be some wires that we're going to be looking for. So to gain us access to where those wires are going to be, there's this panel here right by your OBD2 port. We're going to want to pop this out so you can kind of just reach underneath and just pry this down, and there's going to be some clips along the way, but it pops out pretty easy. You're also going to want to take off this side panel too. It's going to give us a lot more room to work because we're going to need to pop this section out because we're going to mount our brake controller right in this area. So again, this is just going to be some clips. You can just kind of work your finger along here and then just kind of put it at an angle, and that should slide out as well. Now at this point you can see a white tag and some taped up wires here. Now this was ran down just some of the factory wire loom, but you're going to be looking for these colors here. We have a red with a purple stripe, a white, a blue, and another white as well. And you'll see this tag here does denote the trailer brake locations, or what at least the wires are going to. So once you find that wire, it's going to be taped up to the factory wire loom. You can kind of just snip that lightly, make sure you don't damage the wires, and pull that up so you have a little bit more room to work with it. We have access to those wires, but before we hook anything up, it kind of comes down to playing out where we want the brake controller. This is where the factory one normally goes, so it kind of makes sense to put our Redarc here. Now, to get this panel out, it does kind of snap into this top one, so we're going to want to pop that out first, and there's going to be a little screw up here that we're going to need to take out in order for this to pop out. So to get this out, you can look through the side and see where the clips are. So the best thing you can do is either get a trim panel tool to kind of pry on them. A flathead also works, and that way you can kind of separate this out, and these kind of interlock into each other. So you are going to need to get this to kind of pop out. You don't have to completely separate it. You're just going to want these bottom ones out enough to where we can draw this back and unhinge it from the other. You can kind of reach in here and just kind of reach in there so there's pressure there. You're not going to want to pull and crack the plastic, so just take your time, but we should be able to get these to kind of pop out like that, and then this other side should be the same way, or you can kind of go from underneath here to get to one of those clips, and you should be able to get this to pop out. Again, just be careful. These clips are somewhat delicate and you don't want to break these because the interior is not going to go back exactly the same. So there we go, with that clip popped out. This kind of pulls up. I'm going to leave this here because the HVAC vent is still attached. I don't want to separate that if we don't have to. And right in the center here we have a 7mm screw, so I'm just going to use a small ratchet and socket here to get this out. So once you get your screw out, we're going to be able to pop this, and it's actually really easy to get to these clips right here, so if you're having trouble with your hands, you can kind of just reach back behind the metal here and just pry that, and that'll pop that out. So we have one on the other side as well. Now these interlock, so if you're having trouble here, you're going to want to pull this out a little bit to unhinge it, and that's going to allow you to pull this out and not be hung up. So don't pull too tight, because you do have your plugs here, and you're going to see where this little dummy plug is where we're going to be mounting up. Now I went ahead and kind of traced out this pocket area because just because there's a flat surface, you want to make sure that there's still clearance once it's installed. As the plug is fairly long, you want to make sure that it's not going to bump into anything, and that way you only have to drill once and you're good to go. So for now, I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to take our wires here, and I'm going to pull back this electrical tape and gaining us access to the end of the wire, and I'm going to start stripping those ends back so we can make our connection. So I've gotten the tape off, and you can see there's a little bit of sticky residual, but that's no problem. So let's kind of go through these wires and see what we got. So our first one here that we have is going to be our white wire, and this is just going to be our ground. So that's going to go to our white wire that we have on our harness. The next one we have is going to be this red and purple. Now this one, they call it red or brown or red or black on the tag, but this is going to be our battery feed. So that's going to be going to our black wire that we have on our harness. Now our blue wire is going to be going to the trailer, to the 7-way, so that's going to connect to our blue. And then we have a white with a blue stripe, and that's going to be to the trailer, is what they're claiming on the tag here, but that's going to go to our red. Now before you do splice into these wires, you may want to disconnect the negative on your battery post, because these are going to be powered wires. Once they're all connected, that's how you get the power to the brake controller. So if you do hit some of the wires, you may have some grounding and some sparking going on. So just to prevent that, you might want to unhook that terminal. Now I'm going to go ahead and start stripping the ends on these wires so we can make our connection. Now the kit does not come with butt connectors, so you may need to pick some up. We have them available here at eTrailer, and as we hook up to the harness, I'll show you that they're going to be slightly different gauges, so you might want to grab some 10 to 12 gauge, as well as some 14 to 16, and that way you can kind of adjust for the size wire gauge. Now on our harness side, what I've done is I've actually taken the twist tie that they've included, and I'm going to put the butt connectors on this side. It's going to make it a little bit easier to just kind of feed those in and be able to crimp, rather than having those attached and trying to balance two wires at once. So moving this a little bit closer is going to make it easier to feed up. These, they come already pre-stripped, so pretty easy here. You can just peel off this end. And this is where you'll see the different gauge wiring. So our blue and black are obviously a little bit thicker than our red and white. So I've chosen to put some slightly larger butt connectors. So as I mentioned before, these are 1210. These will fit on the black and blue. And then we also have these blue ones here, which are going to be our 16 and 14 gauge. So we'll get those on, crimp these down. And with all of your connections, once you crimp them, I always kind of go back and just give it a quick tug, just to make sure that they're not going to become loose over time. That way you're not having to go back and try to find out why your wires aren't working and try to re-crimp. So you can see I've just attached my blue to my blue. My black power wire is going to go to our red and purple, and then I'm just going to go ahead and get our white with blue stripe. That's going to go to our red. This white with blue is pretty thin wire, so I'm going to just double up this end, just to kind of give us a little bit more thickness to bite into that butt connector. Now with all of those connections made, we're going to want to go ahead and grab our module box. Now with our module, you're going to see that this plug goes right here. So pretty simple, just snap that in place. And then on the other side, you're going to have this style connector, which this is what your cable is going to look like in the kit. And what I'm going to do is plug this in here. And then this end is going to go into the brake controller. So we know where we want to roughly put our brake controller. So I'm going to just feed our wire out through that, and then I'm going to take this panel off by taking those plugs off, and it's going to make it easier for us to be able to mount up our brake controller. But for now, we'll just take this portion and I'm going to feed it through this opening. That way we have that kind of set in place. So now we can take this off and just pull these red tabs back, and it's kind of the locking mechanism on these. Sometimes a little help with this flathead screwdriver to pry those up. It goes a long way. And once those are up, you can just push in the tab. You just make sure that you remember where they go. So this is going to be our lighting feature here is going to have our green wire in it, and then we have our drive modes as well as our four-wheel drive selection. That's going to be the one with the yellow, the black, the white, and oh, we have two blacks. So we'll get these separated. So when it comes to mounting, you're going to want to make sure that you have clearances behind, and I've kind of double checked just to make sure that ours is going to fit in the spot that we're kind of wanting. Now you're also going to want to make sure that you're just doing a small pilot hole. You kind of want this aligned because it's going to be sitting in this. So I'm going to go on just on the, it will be the left side of this dummy plug here, and I think that's going to be a good spot. So just making sure that I'm clear here. If we have to, we can trim some of this plastic, but ideally to make it a little bit easier, I'm just going to find a sweet spot, mark it here with a punch, and then I'm going to just do a small pilot hole, and then we're going to need to enlarge that. Now I have a larger drill bit here. As far as size, it's going to be, you're going to want to match it up to this plastic collar, and this is going to lock this in place. So this will poke through, this will tighten down, holding it in place. So having a drill bit to enlarge it just to the same diameter or a little bit larger than this plastic collar is going to be key once we have our pilot hole made. So I'm just going to make a small dimple here for our pilot hole. So now we'll go back and we're just going to enlarge this out. We'll just give this a quick test fit, and that's mounting up perfect. So what we can do now, I'm going to just kind of clean this up a little bit. Just some of these, this is almost like a rubberized textured material, so I'm going to just kind of clean these burrs off. That way we can get a nice flush mount. And then pretty easy, we're just going to take our brake controller here, feed it in, and our plastic collar is just going to slip over it, and then we can tighten this down. Now it doesn't need to get too terribly tight. It is a plastic collar, so you really don't want to get too crazy as far as tightening goes. And I might grab a socket and just hand tighten it on, but really I'm able to get a decent amount of rotation just by hand, and it does already feel like it's pretty snug, so already it's holding pretty tight. Something you might want to do before tightening down, and this is kind of up to you, but there's a little sticker that comes in the kit, and this is just going to indicate exactly what your numbers are sitting at. So a lot of times I'll put this in the 12 o'clock position. That way it's nice and easy for the driver to see, and that way when you dial it you can see exactly where it's at. So this is just a two-piece little sticker. We'll just pull off one tab of it, and then as I mentioned, 12 o'clock position is kind of what I generally shoot for, and that way it's nice and visible. Just align that over, and once you're happy with it you can go ahead, peel off the back end. Put this back in place. You can see this is generally what it's going to look like, and that's the glory of the Redarc. It is very clean looking. It's quite small footprint. Now it does come out with a knockout plate, and this works pretty well with a lot of different vehicles that have knockout plates to put this in, or you can simply take a step bit or a hole saw and mount this in. Our customer opted not to install this, which I kind of tend to agree. I think this is a much cleaner look, and as long as you know where the trailer brakes are and you're the one operating the vehicle, I don't think this is necessary, and I think this is just really clean. So this is the other option. Just know that you are going to have to check your clearances again if you are planning on using this knockout plate. I'm going to make sure that I get all my other plugs back in. And these plugs are different, so it's kind of hard to mess that up. And then this will just plug into here, and this is going to be a good test. We should be able to just kind of push this, and if it's illuminating like you see in blue here, that's a good sign. We're getting all the power that we need. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to mount our module up as well as the excess wire, and really this can mount anywhere as long as it's secure and it's out of the way of anything that's moving, like the steering column generally. So just make sure that it's in a solid location, and the way that I normally mount these up is I take a zip tie and you can run it through one end, kind of go around it here, And then once you find that solid point, just zip tie that in place. And then again, I'm gonna just bundle up my wires, so you can actually use zip ties or the twist ties that came with it just to kind of clean that up and keep it in a nice tight position. And then we're just gonna reinstall this in the reverse order that we took it out. Now, our module does use kind of a motion of trying to pick out where it's at to calibrate itself. So the main thing you're really wanting to do is make sure that it's not going to be moving around. So make sure you have a good point. I tried my best to get on a support beam, but I did see that when I was moving the steering wheel in and out just to check clearances that I did possibly run a risk, and honestly it was a pretty tight spot. So what I did just to kind of make it a little bit easier is I ran a zip tie around one of the plastic supports here, and then I just used 2 on this loop, and really, I mean, this is wedged in there nice and good. It's really solid. And then the rest of the wire, I just found some extra factory wire loom that's already there that I just kind of tied into, zip that up so it's nice and clean. So we're gonna get this back together. Something else that we're gonna wanna make sure that we do is turn our knob all the way counterclockwise, and that's gonna zero it out. And the knob just kind of pops off by just putting a little pressure here. And then once you have that all the way counterclockwise, you can go ahead and align that 0 with the top portion of our indicator sticker. So with all of our panels put back in place, this is what it looks like when it's installed, and you can see nice small footprint, nice and clean looking, and it just kind of matches the OEM appearance without having to have that large brake controller. Now we are going to need to calibrate this, but the great thing about it is you don't have to hook it up to a trailer, and generally just normal driving will calibrate it, because really all it's trying to do is, with the G-force in the module as it moves around, it needs to find its home. So that's why you make it nice and securely mounted, that way it's not going to move, and just normal braking here and there is going to learn that, and you'll be calibrated, ready to go. And that was a look and installation of the Redarc Tahoe Pro Elite braking controller on a 2022 Chevrolet Tahoe.